The rain had been falling since dawn. Not hard, but steady. The kind that soaks everything slowly, like time itself dripping through the cracks of an old roof. Lillian Hayes stood at her kitchen window, watching the water slide down the glass in crooked paths. She'd lived in this house for 53 years, long enough to know every creak in the floorboards, every draft that slipped through the window frames in winter, and every bird that nested in the oak out back. At 78, her days moved quietly, shaped by routine, coffee at 6, crossword puzzle with breakfast, laundry on Tuesdays, church on Sundays if her knees weren't too stiff. Her husband had been gone 5 years now. Not suddenly, no heart attack or accident, but slowly, like a candle burning down to its last inch. He'd faded in a hospital bed with soft light and beeping machines, holding her hand until he couldn't anymore. Their children lived far away, one in Colorado, the other in North Carolina, both with families of their own, busy lives that didn't leave much room for visits, though they called every Sunday without fail. Lillian didn't mind. She'd raised them to fly, not to hover. Outside, the gravel driveway was turning to mud. The garden she'd planted in spring, okra, tomatoes, a few stubborn squash vines, was drooping under the weight of the rain. She sighed, turned from the window and filled the kettle for tea. That's when she heard it, a soft knock barely louder than the rain itself. She paused. No one ever came to the back door. The front was for company, neighbors bringing casseroles after funerals, the occasional Jehovah's Witness with pamphlets. But the back door opened into the kitchen, the heart of the house, and only family used it. Yet there it was again, another knock, hesitant, almost apologetic. Curious, she wiped her hands on her apron and walked to the door. Through the fogged glass, she saw a figure, tall but hunched, shoulders pulled in like he was trying to disappear. He wore a thin jacket soaked through and his hair clung to his forehead in dark strands. He wasn't holding an umbrella, just a small duffel bag clutched like it might blow away. Lillian opened the door just a crack, enough to see his face clearly. He looked young, maybe early 20s, but his eyes were tired in a way that didn't match his age. There was no menace in his stance, no demand in his posture. Just wet clothes, empty hands, and a quiet kind of desperation. "Ma'am," he said, voice rough but polite. "I don't mean to bother you." The storm, it came up fast. "I was just wondering if I could sit under your porch awning for a bit. Just till it lets up." She studied him for a long moment. Not because she was suspicious, though she'd been warned enough times by the local news about strangers, but because she recognized something in him. Not danger. Loneliness. The kind that settles in your bones when you've got nowhere to go and no one asking where you've been. Without a word, she pushed the door open wider. "You'll catch your death out there," she said. "Come on in." He hesitated, as if he couldn't believe it. "You sure?" "I don't got nothing to offer." "I didn't ask for anything," she cut in gently. "Just get out of that rain." He stepped inside, dripping onto the worn linoleum. She handed him a towel from the laundry basket near the door. "Dry off. And take off that jacket before you ruin my floors." He did as he was told, moving carefully like he was afraid of breaking something or being asked to leave. She watched him from the corner of her eye as she went to the stove. The kettle whistled. She poured hot water into a chipped mug, dropped in a tea bag, and set it on the table. "Sit," she said. He sat. For a while, neither spoke. The only sounds were the drumming rain on the roof and the soft ticking of the wall clock above the sink. Then, almost to himself, he murmured, "Haven't smelled food like this in... I don't even know how long." That did it. Lillian turned, opened the fridge, and pulled out a bowl of leftover collard greens. She dumped them into a pot, added a splash of broth, a pinch of red pepper flakes, and a chunk of smoked ham hock she'd been saving. The scent bloomed instantly, earthy, rich, comforting. She warmed up yesterday's cornbread in the oven, the edges crisping just right. "You eat?" she asked, not looking at him. "Yes, ma'am," he said quickly. "But I can't pay." "I didn't cook it for money," she said, stirring the greens. "I cooked it because it's there. And you're here. That's enough." He swallowed hard. She saw his throat move, saw the way his fingers tightened around the edge of the table. When she set a full plate in front of him, steaming greens, golden cornbread, a slice of sweet potato, he didn't reach for it right away. He just stared at it like it might vanish. "Go on," she urged. "It won't bite." He picked up the fork with trembling hands and took a bite. Then another, and another. He didn't speak, didn't look up. But tears welled in his eyes, spilling over before he could stop them. He wiped them away fast, embarrassed. Lillian said nothing. She poured herself a cup of tea and sat across from him, giving him space to eat, to breathe, to just be. She'd seen that kind of hunger before. Not just for food, but for kindness, for a moment where someone didn't look at you like you were a problem to be solved. When he finally spoke, his voice was steadier. "My name's Eli," he said. "I've been walking for 3 days. Hitched a ride from Knoxville, but the guy dropped me off 10 miles back when his truck broke down. Been on foot since," she nodded. "Where are you headed?" "Nowhere, really," he admitted. "Lost my job last month. Couldn't keep the apartment. Been sleeping in bus stations, under bridges. Wherever I can." He looked down at his plate, now nearly empty. "I didn't even know this road led to a house. Just saw the lights and thought, maybe I could rest a minute." Lillian reached across the table and patted his hand. Just once, quick and warm. "Well, you're safe here tonight," she said. "Got a couch that's seen better days, but it's dry. And tomorrow we'll figure something out." He looked up at her then, really looked like he was seeing her for the first time. Not just an old woman behind a door, but someone who saw him too. Someone who didn't flinch at his mess. Outside, the rain kept falling. But inside, for the first time in a long while, it felt like shelter. Morning came soft and golden, the kind of light that slips through curtains like a secret. The rain had stopped sometime in the night, leaving the world outside washed clean and humming with birdsong. Lillian woke before sunrise, as she always did, her body tuned to the rhythm of decades. She padded to the kitchen in her slippers, the floor cool underfoot, and started the coffee. The house was quiet except for the low creak of the old couch in the living room, someone shifting in sleep. She peeked around the doorway. Eli was still there, wrapped in the quilt she'd tossed over him before bed. One arm hung off the edge, fingers curled loosely. He looked younger in sleep, the lines of worry smoothed away, just a boy with too much weight on his shoulders. She let him rest. There was no rush. By the time he stirred, the kitchen smelled of bacon, scrambled eggs, and fresh biscuits. He sat up slowly, blinking like he wasn't sure where he was. Then memory returned, and he stood quickly, smoothing his wrinkled shirt. "I'm sorry," he said, voice thick with sleep. "I didn't mean to overstay." "Overstay?" Lillian chuckled, flipping a biscuit onto a plate. "Honey, you barely stayed at all. Sit down. Breakfast's ready." He hesitated, then obeyed, sliding into the same chair from last night. This time he didn't cry, but there was a quiet awe in the way he watched her move. Like she was doing something miraculous just by cracking eggs into a bowl. They ate in comfortable silence at first. The only sounds, the clink of forks and the distant coo of mourning doves. Then between bites, Eli began to talk. Not all at once, but in pieces, like he was testing the water before diving in. He'd worked at a warehouse in Knoxville, loading trucks 6 days a week. Decent pay, nothing fancy but enough to keep a roof over his head. Then the company got bought out. New owners. New rules. They cut hours, then staff. He was let go with 2 weeks' notice and a handshake. His landlord didn't care. When rent came due and he couldn't pay, he was out on the street with a duffel bag and a phone that died 3 days later. "I tried calling shelters," he said, pushing a piece of biscuit around his plate. "Most were full, others, well, let's just say I didn't feel safe." He didn't elaborate, and Lillian didn't ask. She'd seen enough in her life to know that some stories don't need details to be understood. She poured him more coffee. "You got family?" He shook his head, then paused. "I got a brother, older, but we haven't spoken in years. After our mom passed, things got complicated. He blamed me for something I didn't do. Or maybe he just needed someone to blame." He shrugged, but his eyes stayed down. "Last I heard, he moved to Atlanta. Big job, fancy life. Not the kind that looks back." Lillian nodded slowly. She knew about brothers who drifted apart. Her own had moved to California in the 70s and never came home, not even for their father's funeral. Time and silence could build walls thicker than brick. "You ever think about reaching out?" she asked gently. "Every day," he admitted. "But what do I say?" "Hey, remember me? I'm the one who disappeared and showed up broken?" He gave a weak laugh. He'd probably hang up before I finished the sentence. "Maybe," she said. "Or maybe he's been waiting for you to call." Eli didn't answer, but something in his expression shifted, just a flicker like a door cracking open. After breakfast, Lillian showed him the small bathroom down the hall. "Hot water's a little slow," she warned, "but it works." While he showered, She packed a paper sack with food, 2 boiled eggs, a banana, a peanut butter sandwich on homemade bread, and a thermos of sweet tea. She also slipped in a banana muffin she'd baked the day before, still soft in the center, and tucked a $20 bill underneath it, folded small so it wouldn't be obvious. When he came out, clean-shaven and wearing the same clothes, now dried and brushed free of lint, he looked like a different person. Lighter somehow. Hopeful. "I can't thank you enough," he said, standing awkwardly by the back door. "You don't have to," she replied, handing him the sack. "Just promise me one thing. Anything. Don't give up on yourself. The world's got a way of turning corners when you least expect it, but you gotta be around to see it." He nodded, eyes glistening again, but this time he held it together. "I'll remember that." She walked him to the edge of the driveway where the gravel met the county road. A truck rumbled past in the distance, heading east. He adjusted the strap of his duffel bag, took a deep breath, and turned to her. "If I ever get back on my feet," he said, "I'll come find you. I'll cook for you." "I swear," Lillian smiled. "You do that. And when you do, bring your brother." He laughed, a real one this time, and started walking. She watched until he turned the bend and disappeared from view. Then she went back inside, washed the breakfast dishes, and sat at the table with her coffee, staring out at the garden. The tomatoes were ripening. She'd need to pick them soon. Days turned into weeks. Life returned to its quiet pace. She weeded the okra patch, canned peaches from the tree out back, and mailed a birthday card to her granddaughter with a $5 bill tucked inside for ice cream. She thought about Eli sometimes, wondered if he caught a ride, if he found work, if he ever dialed that old number in his phone. But she didn't dwell. She'd done what she could. The rest was up to him, and maybe a little grace. One afternoon, while sorting laundry on the porch, she heard engines. Not one car, several. Low, powerful rumbles that didn't belong on this stretch of road. She stood, shielding her eyes against the sun. Down the lane, a line of black SUVs slowed to a stop. Her heart jumped. Had something happened to one of her children? Was this some kind of mistake? She wiped her hands on her apron and stepped forward, bracing herself for news she didn't want to hear. But as the first door opened, a familiar figure stepped out, and her breath caught in her throat. It was him, Eli, but not the same boy who'd knocked on her door in the rain. This one stood taller, wore clean clothes, and carried himself like someone who'd found solid ground again. And he wasn't alone. Behind him stepped a man in a crisp suit, followed by a woman holding a bouquet of sunflowers. Bright, bold, and utterly out of place in this dusty corner of the world. Lillian didn't move. She just watched, heart pounding as they walked toward her porch. Something big was coming. She could feel it in her bones. And for the first time in years, she wasn't sure if she was ready. The engines idled softly like big cats purring in the heat. Lillian stood barefoot on the porch step, one hand resting on the peeling railing, the other still clutching a folded towel from the laundry basket. Her pulse thudded in her ears, louder than the cicadas in the trees. She'd seen police cars before, once when a neighbor's dog got loose, another time when a storm knocked out power for 3 days. But this was different. These vehicles gleamed under the afternoon sun, windows tinted dark, tires spotless. They didn't belong here, not on this quiet stretch of red clay and pine trees. She watched as the young man, Eli, turned and said something to the man beside him. The other man nodded, straightened his tie, and followed. The woman with the sunflowers smiled gently, but kept her distance as if sensing this moment wasn't hers to step into yet. Lillian didn't move. She just waited, her mind racing through possibilities. Had Eli gotten into trouble? Was this some kind of legal thing? Had he mentioned her name and now they were here to ask questions? She hadn't done anything wrong, just fed a hungry stranger. But fear has a way of twisting even the simplest things into something ominous. Then Eli reached the bottom of the steps. He looked up at her, and his eyes, those same tired eyes from weeks ago, were bright now, clear, full of something she couldn't quite name. Relief? Gratitude? Joy? "Miss Lillian," he said, voice steady but thick with emotion. "You remember me?" She let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. "Course I do," she said, stepping down to meet him. "You don't forget someone who eats your last batch of cornbread like it's gold." He laughed, and it was the same laugh from that rainy morning. Real, unguarded. Then he turned slightly and gestured to the man behind him. This is my brother, Julian. The man stepped forward. He was older, maybe mid-30s, with the same sharp jawline as Eli, but dressed like he'd just stepped out of a boardroom. Pressed slacks, leather shoes, a watch that probably cost more than Lillian's truck. But his expression wasn't cold or distant. It was soft. Nervous even, ma'am, Julian said, extending a hand. Thank you doesn't come close to covering it, but... Thank you. Lillian shook his hand. His grip was firm but respectful. For what exactly? She asked, glancing between the two brothers. For saving my brother, Julian said simply. For giving him a chance when no one else would. Eli nodded. After I left here, I hitched a ride to Atlanta. Got a job loading boxes at a distribution center. Slept in a shelter at first, but I kept your words with me. About corners turning. And they did. He paused, swallowing. One day I saw Julian's name on a company newsletter pinned to the break room wall. Same last name. Same hometown. I almost didn't say anything. But I did. I asked if he was the Julian. Turned out he was. Julian took over. I hadn't heard from Eli in 6 years. After our mom passed, we blamed each other for things we couldn't control. I shut him out. Thought he'd given up on me. When he walked into my office, worn shoes, tired eyes, but standing tall, I didn't recognize him at first. Then he said, "You used to buy me ice cream after Little League games." And I just broke down. Lillian listened, her heart swelling in her chest. She didn't say anything. She just let them tell their story. The way people do when they've carried something heavy for too long and finally find someone safe to set it down with. We've been talking every day since, Eli said. He helped me get an apartment. Got me into a training program. I'm working my way up now. Not just loading trucks, but learning logistics, planning routes. It's honest work. Good work. And none of it would have happened, Julian added, if you hadn't opened your door that day. Lillian looked down at her hands, wrinkled, spotted with age, but strong. She'd done so little, really. Just made a meal, offered a dry couch, said a few kind words. Yet somehow it had rippled out into something bigger than she could have imagined. The woman with the sunflowers finally stepped forward. I'm Clara, she said warmly. I work with Julian, and I've heard so much about you. She held out the flowers. These are for you, sunflowers, because they always turn toward the light. Lillian accepted them, surprised by their weight, their brightness. Well, she said, a little flustered, ain't that something? They stood there for a moment in the late afternoon sun, 4 strangers bound now by something quiet and powerful. Then Julian cleared his throat. There's something else, he said carefully. Something we'd like to give you. He nodded to Clara, who opened a leather portfolio and pulled out a folder. Inside was a deed, crisp and official looking, and a set of keys tied with a red ribbon. We bought a house, Julian explained. Just outside town. 1 level, wide doorways, close to the clinic and the pharmacy. Fully paid for. All utilities covered for the next 5 years. It's yours if you'll have it. Lillian stared at the papers. A new house, no stairs. Closer to help. It was everything her aging body needed. Everything her children had been gently suggesting for years. And yet, she looked past the paperwork, past the generosity, and saw something deeper. She saw Eli's face, the way he'd looked when he first sat at her table, hollowed out by hunger and hopelessness. She saw the man he'd become, standing tall beside his brother. And she thought about all the others like him, walking highways, sleeping under bridges, wondering if anyone sees them. I appreciate it, she said slowly. More than you know, but I can't take the house, Julian blinked. You don't want it? It's not that, she said gently. It's just, this old place? It's got my husband's handprints in the porch railing. My daughter's height marks on the kitchen doorframe. It's full of memories. I'm not ready to leave it. She paused, then met his eyes. But if you really want to honor what happened here, how about this? Use that money to build something else. Julian frowned slightly. Like what? A kitchen, she said. Not fancy. Just a little place right here in town, where anyone who's hungry can walk in and get a hot meal. No questions asked. No judgment. Just food and maybe a kind word. She glanced at Eli. You remember how that felt? Eli's eyes filled again. He nodded. Julian was quiet for a long moment. Then a slow smile spread across his face. You're asking me to build a place like this one. Exactly, Lillian said. Only bigger. So more folks can find their corner. Clara was already scribbling notes in her portfolio. "We could partner with local farms for produce," she said excitedly. "Hire folks who need a second chance. Maybe even offer job training." Lillian didn't hear the rest. She was watching Eli. He was looking at her the way a child looks at a hero in a storybook, not with awe, but with quiet certainty that good things still happen in the world. Later, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in oranges and purples, they sat on her porch, Lillian in her rocking chair, the brothers on the steps, Clara sipping sweet tea from a mason jar. They talked about plans, about names, about how the kitchen would have big windows so people could see the garden outside and know they were welcome. And as fireflies began to blink in the dusk, Lillian realized something. She hadn't just fed a stranger that rainy day. She'd planted a seed, and now, against all odds, it was starting to bloom. The idea took root fast, faster than anyone expected. Within a week, blueprints were drawn. Within a month, bulldozers rolled into an empty lot near the edge of town, not far from the old post office. Lillian didn't know much about construction, but she knew people. She called the pastor at the Methodist church, the owner of the hardware store, even the retired school teacher who still ran the community garden. Word spread quietly, the way good news often does in small places. Not with fanfare, but with nods over coffee and promises whispered at the grocery store checkout line. She didn't ask for donations. She didn't need to. Folks showed up with hammers, paintbrushes, bags of nails. A local contractor offered his crew on weekends. Someone donated a commercial stove they'd pulled from a diner that closed down. A teenager from the high school built shelves in shop class and brought them over in his pickup. No one talked about it like charity. They called it helping Lillian, as if she were the one in need, not the hundreds of strangers who might one day walk through those doors. Lillian visited the site every Tuesday and Friday, always in her Sunday dress and sensible shoes, always with a thermos of sweet tea and a tin of oatmeal cookies. She'd sit on an upturned bucket near the foundation and watch the walls rise brick by brick, beam by beam. Eli came every time, sleeves rolled up, sweat on his brow, hammer in hand. He wasn't just overseeing anymore, he was working. Mixing concrete, running wires, sanding door frames until they were smooth as butter. He said it kept him grounded. "This place," he told her once, wiping his forehead with the back of his wrist, "it's like paying forward the kindness you gave me. Only now I get to look people in the eye and say, 'You're safe here.'" Julian came less often. His job still demanded long hours, but when he did, he brought more than money. He brought connections, a refrigerated truck from his company's fleet, a grant application that secured funding for a year's worth of groceries. He even convinced a retired chef from Atlanta to come down once a month to train volunteers on meal prep and food safety. He used to run a kitchen for 100, Julian said, grinning. Now he says this is the most important kitchen he's ever seen. Lillian just smiled. She didn't need grand speeches. She saw the truth in the way the volunteers lingered after their shifts, sharing stories over leftover stew. She saw it in the way the local kids started bringing their art projects to hang on the unfinished walls. Drawings of smiling suns, hands holding hands, plates piled high with food. By early fall, the building was ready. They called it Lillian's table. Not soup kitchen, not shelter, just a table, simple, honest, open. The sign out front was hand-painted by a local artist, warm yellow letters on a wooden plank with a small sunflower carved beneath the name. Opening day arrived on a crisp Saturday morning. The air smelled of wood smoke and baking bread. Neighbors brought casseroles, pies, jars of homemade jam. A string quartet from the community college played softly near the entrance. There were no speeches, no ribbon cutting, just an open door and a pot of simmering chicken and dumplings on the stove. The first person to walk in wasn't someone from the streets. It was an elderly man from down the road, recently widowed, who said he just couldn't face another meal alone in his empty house. Lillian served him herself, placing the bowl in his hands and sitting with him while he ate. Then came a young mother with 2 toddlers, her car broken down at the gas station. No money for a tow. She got a hot plate, a bottle of water, and a ride to the mechanic from a volunteer who happened to be a retired mechanic himself. By noon, the dining room was full, not packed, but comfortably so. People talked, laughed, passed the salt. No one asked where you'd been or where you were going. You just sat, you ate, and for a little while you belonged. Eli worked the kitchen all day, moving between stoves and counters like he'd been born to it. At one point, he brought Lillian a plate, her favorite, collard greens slow-cooked with smoked turkey, buttered cornbread, and a slice of sweet potato casserole. She took one bite and closed her eyes. "You remembered," she said. "Every detail," he replied, grinning, "even the pinch of sugar in the greens." Later that afternoon, as the sun slanted through the big windows, Lillian stood near the back, watching. A man in a worn jacket sat alone at a corner table, head bowed over his food. She recognized the look, the same one Eli had worn that rainy day. Without a word, she walked over and set a fresh biscuit beside his plate. He looked up, startled. "Extra," she said simply. "We always make too many." He nodded, throat working, and whispered, "Thank you." She patted his shoulder and walked away. No fanfare, no performance. Just a biscuit, and the quiet understanding that sometimes that's enough. That night, after the last dish was washed and the lights turned low, Lillian sat on the back step with Eli. The stars were out, bright and close in the country sky. Crickets sang in the tall grass. "You did it," he said softly. "No," she corrected. "We did it." He was quiet for a long moment. "Then I called him again last week. My dad left a message. Didn't expect him to answer, but he did." Lillian turned to him. "And?" he cried, Eli said, voice cracking. "Said he'd been looking for me for years but didn't know how to start. We're meeting next month. In person." She reached over and squeezed his hand. "Some corners take longer to turn," she said. "But they turn." Inside the building, the kitchen was dark, but clean, ready, waiting. And somewhere out there, on a highway or a bus bench or a park bench under a streetlight, someone was walking, tired, hungry, maybe a little lost. But soon, they'd hear about a place with a yellow sign and a warm light in the window, a place where a stranger might cook them a meal and change everything. Time has a way of softening edges, of turning sharp grief into quiet memory, of weaving strangers into something like family. A year after the doors of Lillian's table first opened, the place didn't just feed people, it held them. Not with rules or programs, but with the steady rhythm of shared meals, warm greetings, and the kind of silence that doesn't need filling. Lillian still came every Sunday. Not to manage, she'd long since handed that over to a small team of regulars, but to sit, to listen, to remind folks that kindness doesn't need a title to matter. She'd arrive just before noon, her hair neatly pinned, a cloth bag slung over her shoulder with her knitting inside. She never cooked anymore. Her hands weren't as steady as they used to be. But she always brought something, a pie from her oven, a jar of pickled okra, or sometimes just herself, which was more than enough. Eli was there every week without fail. He'd taken over the Sunday shift, arriving before sunrise to light the stoves and chop vegetables. He'd learned to cook not just from memory, but from heart. His collard greens had become legend, slow-simmered for hours with smoked turkey necks, a splash of apple cider vinegar, and that secret pinch of sugar Lillian had taught him. People came from 3 counties over just for a taste, though they'd never admit it was the food alone that kept them coming back. One Sunday in late October, the air crisp with the first real bite of autumn, a man walked in who hadn't been seen before. He was older, maybe in his 60s, with tired eyes and a worn flannel shirt. He lingered near the door, watching the room like he wasn't sure he belonged. Lillian spotted him right away. She set down her knitting and walked over. "Hungry?" she asked, not too loud, not too soft. He nodded barely. "Then come on in. Seats waiting." He followed her to a small table by the window. Eli saw them from the kitchen and without a word plated a full meal. Greens, cornbread, roasted sweet potatoes, a slice of peach cobbler, and brought it out himself. When he set the tray down, the man looked up, startled. "You didn't have to," he began. "I know," Eli said gently, "but I wanted to." Something in his voice made the man pause. He studied Eli's face, then his eyes widened slightly. You look like someone I used to know." Eli smiled. "Maybe you do." They didn't say more then. But after the man finished eating, slowly, thoughtfully, he stood and walked to the kitchen doorway. "That greens recipe," he said quietly. "My wife used to make it just like that. Said it needed love more than seasoning." Lillian, who'd been watching from her chair, stood and joined them. She was right, she said. The man looked at her, really looked, and something unspooled in his expression. Recognition, regret, hope. "I've been looking for my son," he admitted, voice rough. "For a long time. Didn't know where to start." Then I heard about this place. Heard a young man was cooking like his mama taught him. And I thought maybe. Eli didn't move for a long moment. Then he stepped forward and wrapped his arms around the man. Not tightly but firmly, like he was holding something precious he'd almost lost forever. No words, just breath, and the quiet sound of two hearts finally finding the same rhythm again. Lillian turned away, giving them space, her own eyes stinging. She walked to the back porch and sat on the top step, watching the leaves fall from the old maple tree. Inside, life went on. Dishes clinked, laughter rose, someone played an off-key hymn on the piano in the corner. It wasn't perfect. Some days were harder than others. There were still people who left without saying thank you. Volunteers who burned out. Nights when the pantry ran low. But the table stayed open. Always. Later, as the sun dipped below the trees, Eli came out and sat beside her. His father had gone home for the night, but promised to return next week. He's staying with a cousin in town, Eli said. Says he's got a lot of catching up to do. Lillian nodded. You both do. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the wind rustle through the dry grass. Then Eli reached into his pocket and pulled out a small envelope. I got accepted, he said, handing it to her. She opened it carefully. Inside was a letter from a community college. Full scholarship starting next semester. Culinary arts and nonprofit management. You're going to run this place one day, aren't you? She asked, smiling. Only if you'll let me, he said. She patted his knee. It was always yours, son. I just held it for you till you were ready. That night, as she drove home in her old pickup, the one with the squeaky brakes and the radio that only played 2 stations, Lillian felt a deep kind of peace. Not the flashy kind. Not the kind that comes with applause or headlines, but the quiet certainty that she'd done something that mattered. Not because she built a kitchen, but because she'd opened a door, and through it, people had found more than food. They'd found each other. Back at her house, she fed the cats, checked the locks, and sat on her porch with a cup of chamomile tea. The stars were bright, the night still. Somewhere out there, another stranger was walking, tired and unsure. But now there was a place waiting. A yellow sign. A warm light. A table set with more than plates, set with hope. And every Sunday, without fail, Eli would be there, stirring the pot, remembering the rain, and cooking the greens just the way she taught him.